Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so let's get started. A warm welcome to the launch of the Data Protection Guideline of the Social Protection Interagency Cooperation Board SPIAC-B, and especially of the Working Group on Digital Social Protection. My name is Caroline Bansbach. I'm head of the Unit Health, Education and Social Development at GIZ and stepping in for Axel Klapphake today, who can't be here, unfortunately. And I'm looking forward to guide you through the event. In 2019, the SPIAC-B Working Group on Digital Social Protection was established to enhance convergence and cooperation, to explore and to develop global goods, and to assess innovations for social protection. Due to the increase in the processing of personal data in social protection, the protection of such data is becoming increasingly challenging and increasingly difficult. The concept of personal data protection has gained importance in the realization of the right to data protection and is more important now than ever. Today, we launched the Data Protection Guide as a result of a successful and very intense cooperation over the 2 past years. The new handbook offers guidance, awareness, and support to people designing delivery structures for national social protection programs, and thus dealing with data protection, privacy principles, and legal requirements, particularly when digital technologies are employed. To reflect the collaborative strength behind this guideline, we have many of the contributors with us today. Not all, but many of them, and some of them on the panel. Let me briefly introduce our agenda. Maybe Dirk Meyer will manage to join us. He's Director, General Global Health, Employment Transformation of the Economy at BMZ, was supposed to provide some introductory works. Let's keep the fingers crossed that he will make it. We then have Ben Wagner, data protection expert and author of the guideline from Enabling Digital, and Jacqueline Stein-Kempfe, data protection advisor, and also one of the authors of the guideline at UNICEF, who will present an overview presentation. After that, we are happy to welcome Michael Wojtkowski, Global Director for Social Protection, Director of Protection Development at ELO, Nicolas Bidot, Chief of Food Program, having with us a panel. So I suggest that we start with the overview presentation. And I would like to ask Ben Wagner and Jacqueline Stein-Kempfe to start with the presentation.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm just going to share the slides now, and let's hope that everybody is able to see them. Is that the case?
Yes, we can see it well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Ben Wagner, and together with Carolina Ferrer, who sadly can't be here today, and Jacqueline Stein-Kempfe, we drafted this guide on data protection for social protection as an implementation guide. And just so you know what we'll be talking about in the next few minutes, we'll briefly be providing an overview. We wanted to talk a little bit about how the implementation guide was drafted, what the purpose is of this implementation guide, what the international best practices are in the context of data protection, and how to implement data protection in SP programs. So maybe just briefly, a little bit of an introduction on how this was drafted. I'm sure everybody here is intimately familiar with the SPIAC-B Working Group. But for this reason, I also think it's quite difficult for us to call ourselves authors in the classical sense of the word, because we really weren't authoring a guide, we were more negotiating it. So while we certainly did a lot of writing and a lot of drafting, we were at least as much rapporteurs as we were authors, trying to make sure that everybody from the extremely broad and deep base of knowledge that we had from SPIAC-B had their voice heard, and also to make sure that everybody felt comfortable in the recommendations that were being made. Now, above this, there's always the sort of core idea that we had with the guide and with the report that came before it, that there is nothing fundamentally impossible in doing social protection and data protection together. If anything, these two principles go extremely well together, and when done properly, they can go very well hand in hand. But of course, how exactly that is done in practice and how far and how well this can be implemented on a case-by-case basis is a broad and wide debate that remains ongoing. And so it was very important to us to make sure that there was no partner who felt left behind, and no agency, no group within the SPIAC-B group that somehow felt like we were pushing too much or writing things in there that they didn't feel comfortable with. So this is really an implementation guide with all of the members of SPIAC-B on board. And of course, that sometimes meant some interesting negotiations with a lot of conversations and discussions to really understand how each agency feels and how it's possible to do this in practice. But I think after that long process, it's been many years now that we've been working on this, we actually feel quite happy and excited to finally be able to launch this guide and to really show the positions that are not just the positions of us as authors, but really for SPIAC-B as a group as a whole. And so just moving a little bit towards the content, when we're talking about the purpose of this implementation guide, we were really trying to understand the needs and expectations of practitioners. So to make sure that each practitioner's voice was contextualized within there, and that we weren't speaking just from a position of external experts coming up with this, but rather to encourage and support governments in low and middle income countries who believe that it is possible to combine data protection and social protection in the systems that they're developing now, and see specifically ways in which we can offer guidance, of course, also increasing awareness, and ultimately supporting people on the ground. Because this is the job of the guide as we see it, to support those individuals who are working in these areas, and not to say, we have the gospel solution or the perfect truth, but rather to say, okay, if you're thinking about these issues, how can we support you in trying to find ways to do this effectively? And practitioners, of course, are quite a central audience there in that context, but also when we're thinking about program staff or program managers in the context of development and humanitarian agencies. But also we hope that when we're talking about this, we can also support individual households and families who are participating in social protection programs to become more aware of their rights. They're not just data subjects, so to say, but they also become agents, understanding that they have their own privacy rights, and they also have their own ability to know, to understand, to control the data and social protection programs. Jackie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you have dialed in. I would like to give you an idea now what you can expect when you actually open the guide. So the guide is structured in three main parts. The first one is really why is personal data protection relevant for social protection systems? The second looks at what elements of personal data protection are there under international best practice? What does that actually mean? And the third is practical guidance, how to implement data protection into the social protection programs. Now, with respect to the second one, so what is international best practice of personal data protection? We really wanted to show the social protection practitioners that what we mean if we speak of international best practice of personal data protection, because everybody here knows the European General Data Protection Regulation. It's in everybody's mouth, basically applied everywhere around the world or being looked at. But there are actually many more instruments. Many of them preceded the GDPR and have set the scene for a more detailed regulation like the GDPR. And so there are, for example, principles of regional policy-making bodies like the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or the OECD. There are international conventions like the Convention 108. There are regional conventions like ECOWAS and the Malabo Convention in Africa. And then there are, of course, UN data protection principles and standards for data responsibility more broadly. And all of this, looking at them together actually shows what international best practice is, because all of these documents contain the common minimum denominator, and that are 5 elements. It is data protection principles, rights of data subjects, governance, accountability, enforcement, cross-border data sharing, and safeguards for particularly sensitive personal data like health data and biometric. So why is this relevant? It can be particularly helpful when you are a lawmaker in a given country and want to get an idea what approaches have been taken in different regions of the world on personal data protection. You can take a look at our guide and be guided to other existing standards. And also helpful if you're a country where there are no data protection laws yet, you can look at what has been done at a higher regional level, for example. And then the guide goes on and actually explaining what all of these elements mean in detail. Next slide, please. Or shall I do that? Okay, so the third and most interesting and also the longest part of the guide is then a detailed guidance what needs to be done to ensure that data protection and privacy becomes an integral element effectively of a social protection part, right? So we took a big picture approach here and looked first at high levels as well. We provided recommendations to look at what has to be done in terms of data protection laws. How would you promote and adopt them, always from a social protection perspective? And here, for example, the guide explains why consent is likely not the ideal legal basis for government social protections programs, because a consent can be withdrawn, but the government, of course, needs to know the identity of its beneficiaries. So if there's a law in the making, it needs to contain these other legal bases, as an example. Then we have specific guidance on how to establish a data protection policy at ministerial level. So that's the level below the law. And then also how to draft implementable protocols, guidelines governing the personal data processing of a social protection program. In addition to these more procedural questions, there's then guidance how to apply the principles to a social protection program. So it helps you think through the questions that a social protection practitioner actually has to ask him or herself when working on it. So for example, when shall individuals be able to object to the processing of the personal data? How can I justify large data collections, for example, for a social registry? What type of personal data are needed at the different stages of the program cycle? And we have very specific guidance, really going to the level of detail of the data points, what data would be necessary at the specific stages of the data life cycle. Then this third part has two other sections. So one is practical guidance, how to ensure privacy by design and how to manage risk through data protection impact assessments. And here we put in a particular emphasis on the fact that data protection requirements should be thought through at the design stage. It is very difficult to integrate them at a later stage, particularly when the program is wholly or partly digital. So it's important to do that at the design stage, and we provide step-by-step guidance how to do that. And finally, and this is what Ben mentioned at the beginning, there's a section how to work with providers of digital technology. So the technology providers nowadays are assuming more and more of the processes involved in the delivery of social protection programs, which were previously carried out by the ministry itself or whatever other social protection project owner. So much of the processing of personal data now becomes invisible to the social protection program and practitioners. And that's why the guide describes step by step, the assessment that you should be doing and even the documentation that you should be requesting from the technology provider to the level of detail of IT certifications, DPIAs, data flows, data storage, encryption services, whatever they're able to do. And all of that should be done prior to onboarding a digital technology provider in order to understand the processes behind the scenes and to ensure that these providers comply with the data protection standards of the social protection program. And then we went into the details of three particularly technologies which are creating issues from a data protection perspective. And those are cloud-based information management systems, biometric identification systems, and automated decision-making, highlighting that the guide really deals with the personal data protection issues only and not other maybe issues from an ethical side. Then to finish up, the guide is to make it easy to work with, not only plain text, so it's actually quite colorful. We hope that may help. And you will find throughout the guide boxes highlighted in different colors, some relating to definitions, specific topics like metadata, or just as an example. Then we have implementation tools, checklists of good practices, and also boxes with examples. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much to Ben Wagner and to Jacqueline Stein-Kempfe for having given us an overview on the key elements of the new guide. Thank you. And I would like to welcome now Dirk Meyer, Director General Global Health, Employment and Digital Technologies at BMZ, who has joined us. Dirk Meyer, warm welcome. And I would like to hand over the floor to you. You will provide some introductory keywords for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Thank you very much. Good morning, all together. Do you understand me? My voice? Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Yes, right. We can hear you well.
Yeah, fine. Brilliantly. Yesterday I just arrived again in Washington D.C. Also to have talks about social protection, and therefore I'm right into the topic. I see Michał on the screen, whom I will meet the next days too. So fine to be in your meeting now. Thank you very much. I already saw many details of the guide. Sorry again for being late because I had some technical problems and moved over to my private mobile. Well, just a few thoughts from my side. As you all know, social security programs, schemes become, in the decade of multiple crises, a crucial aspect of bringing societies through these crises. We know this, of course, since COVID. We see it at the moment with all the impacts of the Russian war on Ukraine, and we all don't know what the next crisis will be next. During the COVID crisis, we saw and we still see that governments which implemented even low forms of social security schemes were successful in bringing vulnerable groups much better through the crisis than societies without. So it's a crucial aspect, especially coming from a BMZ and looking from the development policy, especially when we looked on all the shadow crises that were caused by COVID. So it is a crucial aspect for the next years. And it's a topic where most of you were working already on it, but it's a kind of a momentum we see at the moment from the German government, especially when we also look at all the strategic roadmaps from the United Nations and the ILO with the Global Accelerator. When we look at the roadmap from the World Bank around the team of Michał Rutkowski, we see that this momentum is there, and therefore the German minister and governor of the World Bank, Svenja Schulze, took the initiative actually during the autumn meeting of the World Bank to bring together the two roadmaps and try to bring this topic on the next level of a global policy. That's the one aspect I would like to underline. The second one is that also coming from the digital politics, I know that no policy field we are dealing with at the moment is going to develop solutions without digital tools and digital aspects. Therefore, the digitalization is beyond all the planetary topics we have. one key factor in the transformation of our societies and economies and politics. And bringing this together means, first of all, when we talk about social protection, it's being done on the country level and very practical in societies, and will have tailor-made solutions for every country. And digital tools are perfectly able to organize this, especially when it comes to societies that do not have completed regulation, registration frameworks as the developed countries. So this guide now is a perfect puzzle piece in the framework of building social security on the country level. Because as we all know, when we use digital tools, not every and any expert on social protection is also an expert on data protection. And therefore we need, when it comes to practical work, guides like the one we launch today. So in a way, it is bringing together the broad political, global political aspect together with the groundwork on the country level. And for this, you all use the experiences from organizations like the ILO, the World Bank, the development banks, the World Food Programme, UNICEF, and so on, who were already working with these data tools and bringing in all this experience. And I think it's a very good aspect of showing that the momentum is not just there, but that we are all already working on this momentum in a very practical way. So therefore, from my side and from the side of the federal government, a very warm thank you for all of you. I think it's smashing good work, bringing forward what we politically are just accelerating. And therefore, I'm very much looking forward when it comes to the country level in using this guidance for all the ones on the ground who are establishing social protection systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk Meyer, for your warm words, your thanks, and for the highlights that you gave us, especially the relevance regarding social protection on the global policy level, the cooperation with ILO, UNICEF, World Bank in this regard, and the relevance of digital tools when it comes to building sustainable social security systems on country level. Thank you very much. And we now would like to invite our panelists, Michael Rutkowski from the World Bank and Shara Rasavi from ILO, as well as Nicolas Bidot from World Food Programme to come to our panel. Okay. Thank you. Let's look a little bit deeper into the matter. First of all, I would like to ask Sarah. Sarah, we often hear the pushback that data protection is a high-income country obsession or a high-income country issue that is being exported to the rest of the world and creating needless complications. What do you respond to that, especially from the point of view of social protection delivery?
Well, first of all, thank you, Caroline, for that question. And I want to say greetings from Marrakesh, where I'm attending this week the World Social Security Forum organized by ISSA here, with lots of social security institutions from around the world represented. And I have to tell you, there are many interesting discussions and panels on the topic of digitalization and how to enable excellence in service delivery by social security institutions. So I think the topic of the guide is very much alive and being discussed here. I also want to really thank GIZ and Ralph and Caroline in particular for this invitation. And also I want to thank the authors, Ben and Carolina, who was not here with us, and Jacqueline for the work that they have done in preparing this very timely guide and engaging with all of the institutions whose logos are on the guide. So this must have been quite a job. So let me just say in answer to your question, I think, we know in many middle and low income countries, the right to social protection is yet, to be recognized by the state as a right, and also for that right to be realized in practice. We know that, having social protection across the life cycle remains something of a distant dream for the majority of the population. But I think this does not mean that the right to privacy should be somehow seen as something which is secondary or a luxury or somehow in conflict with the right to social protection. This idea of either or, I think, is a bit of a false dichotomy. Now, to really be able to deliver effective services in social protection, you need robust data protection. Without that kind of robust data protection, it's not really possible to have confidentiality and integrity, and for people to trust the system, and without having the availability of data assets. So there's really, in my view, no contradiction between good, strong data protection and effective service delivery. At the moment, I think, in fact, what the issue that we have is that private companies, especially these tech giants, are the ones that are collecting the bulk of the data and using it for commercial purposes. This is usually not well addressed in low and middle income countries, and I think this discussion of data privacy must also address this aspect as it relates to privacy as much as it does in the context of data privacy in the context of what the governmental use of data should be, the public governmental use. So we also really need to look at this issue of how to address issues of data privacy when it comes to the workings of private companies and tech giants. And the very real risks, I think, of digital transformation that social protection is undergoing must be addressed, and I think this guide is a very useful way of addressing some of those issues when it comes to data privacy. However, I also want to emphasize that the option is not, and I don't think anyone is claiming, of not engaging in digital transformation, because that would be a bit, I think, it would be a little bit a kind of backward looking and not really something that we need, because social security institutions are doing it anyway. So we must realize that delivery of public policies are continuous and improvement processes are really important, and that we have to really be able to use these available technologies to reach more people than ever before. In large part because of digital transformation, we can do that, and we must engage to do things in the right way. And I think this is where this guide really takes us and where it really comes in handy and is very useful. So I want to thank all of you for this initiative, and I'll hand over back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your point of view and the relevant points that you raised. I would like now to ask Michael. Michael, which are the biggest data protection challenges for national social protection systems? How do you see the use of new technologies, such as cloud-based solutions, biometrics, and automated decision-making and open data warehouse? Can you elaborate on that?
Thank you very much, Caroline. And it's only appropriate for me to start with big congratulations to the SPIAC-B Working Group on digital social protection, because this is really a major work and we had great presentation. It's really a good example of a joint effort in an area that is absolutely critical for all institutions and all countries that work on social protection. And I see that this publication will be really an essential guide into this space. The privacy of personal data is probably more crucial today than ever because countries started relying on social protection platforms. And by that, I mean social registries, management information systems as enablers of the implementation of social protection. And it has been accelerated and highlighted very much in the COVID-19 pandemic. So my reflection on the challenges is that we need to realize that social protection programs involve very large data sets. So in moving towards systems that are adaptive or shock responsive, countries increasingly need to rely on both integration and interoperability of administrative systems with program information systems to facilitate data exchanges with each other. This is absolutely needed. So we need to link social registries to the tax system, civil registries, vehicle databases, social security institutions, unemployment offices, and so on and so forth. And as a result of these integrations, social protection institutions have to deal with even larger data sets. And this is very valuable actually for implementation, but there are huge risks, associated risks related to data protection in that particular context. And those risks emerge because social protection systems do hold sensitive data, including personal identity, socioeconomic information, social security status, disability, employment status. So the attention needs to be paid, the specific attention needs to be paid to ensuring that these information systems and data sets are properly governed and secured. From my perspective, I would say from our perspective in the World Bank, therefore, a privacy-first design approach, which the guide emphasizes, is absolutely essential because it ensures that social protection systems are developed taking into consideration the concept of digital governance, including cybersecurity, data security, data confidentiality, privacy standards, and personal data protection. So I would put it that way, that if we ever had an ideal world, I think first we need to have adequate data protection and regulations in place. Second, even when those laws and regulations are present, there is actually a need for effective enforcement of them, and doesn't always happen automatically. Third, the information system design and data exchange protocols need to make use of data privacy good practices from the inception stage. In many countries, this ideal situation actually is not in existence. It's really there is just a vision because of various reasons, and those reasons primarily are those challenges you asked me, Caroline, which is challenges to institutional capacity, capacity constraint in using the technology, while at the same time adhering to the data security and privacy rules. I think that the tools you mentioned are indeed very important and interesting. You mentioned cloud-based solutions. They do offer critical efficiencies in terms of storing data, particularly when countries lack the necessary physical infrastructure. So that is extremely important. And social protection programs do require correct identification of beneficiaries, and they also require biometric technology. It inevitably is increasingly used to identify beneficiaries. So the decision which data to collect and stored really should be based on the robustness and correct application of security protocols. That's why I think that particular consideration should be put in the collection and management of biometric data, which is a particular risk. They are both unique, the biometric data that is, and they are permanent, but they might become a grave liability if they fall into the wrong hands. So the way I would think of it is that we need to use objective rules based on rigorous algorithms in which we leverage machine learning or other technologies so that we can take into consideration the incomes or other proxies of poverty where income data is not available, to help address subjectivity of political interference, because at the end of the day, we will always be in a situation, in my view, in which we'll have to select priority beneficiaries. I'm deliberately, as Shara noticed, avoid the word targeting here. Let me add that data warehouses as a central repository of information is very important, can allow for analysis of data to make much more informed decisions. And these technology tools, by the way, are used by countries, have also very important implications in terms of implementation and data privacy. And that point needs to be very carefully considered. I think I would conclude, Caroline, by emphasizing that really, and that I think unites us in this event, technological advances are absolutely critical for development, and we cannot ignore them. We cannot even afford not using them. So the guide is absolutely fundamental. Promises of digital solutions to improve transparency and accountability are real promises. So if we go this route, reducing error and fraud, improve efficiency, then that is the way to go. In my view, if I would be singling out one issue, it is the issue of inclusion, particularly the inclusion of the poor, vulnerable, marginalized groups, to make sure no one in this process is left behind. And there are those risks I just talked about of leaving people behind when leveraging technology for both efficiency and effectiveness. So this will, without any doubt, require ensuring the appropriate data security, privacy rules, that they are in place and enforced. And I think the guide is a fantastic step in this direction. And let me finish again by congratulating the authors. Thank you so much. Caroline, back to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for your considerations on the challenges. And I see that there are many areas and fields where cooperation is still needed.
Caroline, you are welcome to call me by German Michael. I prefer that.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I think there are many areas where collaboration and further commitment is really needed. We are looking forward to that. Let me now hand over to Nicolas Bidot. Nicolas, I would like to ask you, the World Food Programme usually works in fragile settings, some affected by conflict, some by other kinds of external shocks. Can you share with us your considerations on data protection in such, let's say, very difficult settings?
Thank you, Caroline. Talking about challenges, they are just starting construction work next door at the start of this meeting. I hope it's not too inconvenient, but we've learned. Let me start by echoing my panel members, fellow members, on thanking you for the invitation to be on the panel and congratulating the SPIAC members on this fantastic tool that we have now, the implementation guide, the reflection of a great collaboration among the partners. So great work there. On fragile settings, thanks for the question. Certainly, the same principles for data protection and data privacy apply in fragile settings as they do in other contexts. Yet there are other considerations and risks, and certainly risk is one of them. The risks are higher in fragile settings. We've heard that from Michel. It's the risk that adverse consequences on the people we serve happen if something goes wrong. And the other thing is to consider is that in fragile settings, things are more likely to go wrong because there's no data privacy in place, or the system have broken down. So there's a fragile context, there's more risk and likely to have more risk. There's also consideration around the speed at which we need to work in fragile setting in responding, for example, to humanitarian context, whereby practitioners may be under strain and may feel pressured to act in ways that they can accept, or they may perceive to accept lower conditions with regard to data protection and privacy that they would do in more stable context. They may feel obliged to, I think, things they would not do in other normal and stable context. It was mentioned by Dirk also, fragility is dynamics. So there may be a situation where that is stable, but then may become fragile. And so the way we work in a context need to also understand the potential projection and switching into a fragile context. So in that sense, it's important to keep monitoring the change to the situation, the fragility, the different element of fragility that we need to consider as far as data privacy and protection is concerned. It's important for us to recognize that the volume will increase, the volume of fragility, how much we're dealing with fragility. We've heard that, I think, from Dirk. In particular, if you look at the refugee context, this is going to receive even more attention. So how are we doing in this situation in fragile context? As WFP, we've been guided by our policy on data privacy and protection, and that comes with guidance, that comes with tools like the data protection and privacy impact assessment. But the principle is very simple. If we cannot we cannot collect or we cannot share data if the risks are too high. So we go back to the same thing, understanding the risk. The tool I mentioned, the privacy impact assessment, helps to assess the risk, helps to understand, to put in place actions to address the risk before we take any actions around data, or we entertain any data sharing before data sharing takes place in any situation. So understand the risk from a data protection and privacy perspective, but it's also understanding the risk from a policy and a program level. So first, the assessment, we assess, we run the due diligence on doing impact assessment, and we work on data sharing agreements. It's critical to have that in place before we intervene. Now, there's different contexts associated with fragility. There is humanitarian context where social protection is nascent or very limited. And in that situation, we need to intervene very fast because there's a humanitarian, there's a crisis. So it may be that we intervene directly by creating, a register of beneficiaries, and we do direct assistance there. That for sure creates a very attractive new source of data that we need to deal with. And when it is clear that we're not creating a parallel system in that situation, but we need certainly the principles of humanitarian principles apply there. We need to intervene. We need to make sure we address the right beneficiaries at the right time. And in that case, it's clear that no sharing to anyone happens if the conditions are not there. Now, there is other context whereby fragility is still fragile and fragile context, but there is a better social protection system in place to respond. In that case, there's many examples where we've been working in that situation whereby, working through the social protection system, working on that which create an opportunity for scaling up the interventions, the reach to the most vulnerable, the most difficult to reach vulnerable population, vulnerable households, but also at the same time strengthening the systems. And so in that case, we work around data sharing agreement with the government, with partners. We engage with MOUs, and we do the whole due diligence before any data sharing happens. And it could be in two ways. It could be, we have instances where the government has been sharing information with WFP and vice versa. We've been starting a program, and then there is data transfer. That only happens if all the conditions are there, if all the risk is mitigated. Maybe 2 points to reflect on the specific consideration of fragility. It's the issue of data minimization, and I think come throughout the guidance. It's important to make sure that we have the right amount of information that is needed to be, under the principles of privacy and protection agreement. It's in particular important in the context of fragility and humanitarian settings. The second point is, and we've heard also from Michal, there is increased use of technology. Michal mentioned a few examples. There's also blockchain. And I think there is realization that even in fragile, even in humanitarian context, we can also rely on increased technology that will offer more guarantees around data protection and privacy. Thank you. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Nicolas, very much for your words and your perspective on the specific situation and challenges in fragile situations. I would now, to close up the session, I would like to know from you what do you like most with the guide, and what are your perspectives and point of views regarding implementation? Do you have any recommendations on that? Yeah, maybe Michael, can I ask you to start?
It seems to me that when it comes to the implementation, I think that we need to take advantage of, in a way, peer learning. So it would be good to put our minds together to select a few countries that might be particularly amenable to using the guide and putting recommendations in practice. And then we could think of having a communication system in which we inform of pluses, minuses, challenges met. It's so that others can learn. And I recognize that the selection of countries may not be a trivial exercise, but I think we have, and by we I mean us collectively, ILO, WFP, you at the BMZ and GIZ and us, we have relations with so many countries that I think we could come up with the list of 5, 6, where we could focus first and then ensure that we learn from the lessons there. That would be my suggestion. I believe in a way in experiential learning, peer pressure, as well as disseminating good practices. So that's I think one of the ways to consider as we move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Shara, how about you? From your point of view, is there anything to add on that?
I mean, I think I would agree with Michael on that. I think having good practices and really learning from the country level work that is happening, I think that would be very good. And I would also make a plea for this SPIAC-B group on digitalization to continue to really work together as a group. I mean, this is not a one-off thing. I think now that we have the guide, we really need to move into the implementation and to the exchange of the information that we can have across, different agencies that are taking part. So having this SPIAC-B group as an ongoing group, I think will be very important to really keep that line of communication going. And I would also say that it would be also very useful, especially for us, we work very closely with ISA, who's also doing a lot in terms of digitalization and working with social security institutions to disseminate the guide to them and also bring in other institutions like ISA also very much more closely into this conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for these considerations. Nicolas, how about you? From your point of view, are there any ideas or additions to that?
I think we have a fantastic tool in front of us. I think it's a tool that's recognized by the whole SPIAC-B members. So I think we need to. It's a prove it's validated. It brings. It brings some coherence. It brings the standard. It sets some standards, some practices, some step-by-step guidance. So it's a fantastic element. I think what's also very critical about this guide is one, it's specific to social protection. So I think we have a tool now that's specific that we can take out there because it speaks to social protection. It's been endorsed by everyone. It speaks also to the humanitarian and fragility context. So I think whether we work in that part, the low and middle income country, but also within fragility, I think it's a fantastic tool for that. I think one that also comes that I really enjoyed about this guidance is the place of the data subject, the right holders. I think it gives a voice to them. It raises demand on the beneficiaries of the right holders to be asking for it. Each time we click a website now, we're asked whether we accept all the cookies. We need to have them clicking everywhere also to say, I want my rights there. And I think that guides give them a lot of space for that. And we need to make sure we respond to that in that way. And I would agree with Michel and Shah. I think let's work together. We have a guidance. Let's take it to some countries. Let's work together. It's a great tool. And I think we can find good context where we can bring that jointly also to the field. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you for sharing your point of view and the strong commitment. Before we close, actually, I would like to invite Ben and Jacqueline, two of the authors of the guideline. Do you have any wishes after this intense work? Yeah, please come in and share with us.
Jackie, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Now, I think Dirk is not with us anymore, but I was actually just suggesting in the email to Ben and our dear GIZ colleagues, why not do another project in the same group, the SPIAC-B group, on how to work ethically with digital technologies. because I mean, data protection is a very important element, of course, but when you start working with big data and artificial intelligence, you get into ethical questions as well, no? Of how is the model built, and how has the model been trained, and I think that is something that that we could look towards as a follow-up project. And otherwise, my wishes are that this guide is very well distributed and really be really practically used by the countries where UNICEF and WFP operate. So I really hope that it will be of practical use. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for the new idea you provided here in the round. Very interesting. And Ben, how about you?
So I very much agree with Jackie. I think it's a fantastic idea, especially in the area of automation. We see numerous areas where previously decisions made in social protection programs by staff members would be automated in automated systems, and a lot of issues around that go far beyond data protection. So I think there's a lot of areas still to explore where data protection is at the start of that. At the same time, what's exciting is to see that we don't have to sort of push for this or do advocacy for this. If anything, it's like we're being pushed further by all of the people we've heard here in the round, which is really exciting and beautiful for us to see that there's lots of excitement and interested engagement. I agree what was also mentioned, that inclusion is a big challenge here. So in the context, it's not just thinking in terms of data protection, but really this idea of you have the right to be a data point as well, and to be considered and to be thought about, which is also very critical in these contexts. And I think just to also mention that really in this context, we are talking about low and middle income countries, but in a way, we're also talking about a possibility of them leapfrogging from many of the mistakes and the difficulties that have existed in Europe or in North America or elsewhere, where the systems had to be built again and again and again and changed and changed and changed. To be able to do it right first time is really a fantastic opportunity. And this provides tremendous opportunities also for social protection to really show this is best practice, this is how it can be done. And if anything, I think what we've seen sadly in many parts of Europe is that the digitization hasn't always produced the results that we wanted because these things weren't considered first. But that is also then a tremendous opportunity to do it right. And I'm very excited to see if we see this sort of wave of more thoughtful social protection digitization implementations with data protection considered, with ethical things that Jackie was mentioning now, also with considering about sort of doing it in the right way. I think that's a tremendous opportunity that can really strengthen the idea of social protection as a whole. So I'm very excited to see how that will develop in the coming years.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think there's a lot of commitment and a lot of engagement in this regard. And I know that all of the colleagues of the social development team of GIZ are on board now. And I'm very sure that you will take up this together after this session. Having said that, I think we are slowly coming to an end. The time is nearly over. I would like to thank you all the participants who joined us today for your very relevant and valuable contributions to our launch event. You will find the document on socialprotection.org now. You will see the link in the chat. I think some of you have seen it already. There are some thumbs up, and I would also like to ask you to disseminate the guide through your network with your colleagues, and most importantly, of course, to use the guide whenever you can. Yeah, I wish you all a very beautiful week. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for joining the event. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.